regulated. But you got this new group of mortgage finance companies, and they were making loans, and they weren't regulated. We said to the Federal Reserve, set some rules. Alan Greenspan philosophically did not agree with that. He said, you know what? The market's smarter than I am collectively. I can't do that. He refused for 12 years to use that authority, or for 10 years, because he then left. A lot of bad loans got made. Democrats came in 2007, and we passed a bill to say, all right, look, if the Federal Reserve won't do it, we'll do it. We'll make these loans illegal. Ben Bernanke, to his credit, then took the very same authority that Alan Greenspan refused to use and promulgated rules this year that will make it impossible to get those subprime loans. Instead, we've gotten the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, to a point where people can go there instead, so worthy people won't be denied homes. So the first thing we've done is to prevent the subprime loans from recurring.
What do you think of the move by Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs to form holding companies that will allow them to take deposits and whatever benefits it has, and subject them to regulations that they weren't necessarily facing before?
Exactly right. You make that is exactly the point I'm trying to make, and I appreciate you bringing that up. This is a recognition that the movement has been away from unregulated to regulated. You know, when people sell risky loans and they buy only treasury bonds, that's called a flight to safety. We're seeing a flight to regulation. These investment banks, which were inadequately regulated, got themselves in trouble. And people won't give the money. I mean, Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs are basically recognizing that the kind of unregulated activities in which they engage have scared off investors. And so they are becoming banks because that'll help them raise capital, because people will be more likely to invest in an entity that's subject to regulation than they will to invest in one of these that is not subject to regulation and gets itself in trouble. Now, a few years ago, that wasn't the case. People said, oh, I want to go with these unregulated entities. They can make more money. Well, they were making more money in the short term by taking great risks. And in the long term, they get hurt.
Here's one of the questions for debate today, is what ought to be dealt with today and what ought to be left for a new president and a new administration and a new Congress?
Again, a very good question. We need to provide some funding now to unstick the market so that we don't have people going out of the business of making auto loans or getting inventory for their businesses or being able to refinance their homes. We need to accompany that by action today that shuts down, that reduces the number of foreclosures, which continue to be a combined social and economic problem. We've already, thanks to Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke, got rules in place that will stop bad subprime loans from being made, and we passed a bill to put the FHA out there as an alternative for secure 30-year loans for people who can repay. That leaves for next year the very important job of putting regulations in place on the kind of activities, credit default swaps and derivatives of collateralized debt obligations of these very risky entities that are highly leveraged. In other words, people put a little bit at stake, and they manage through various manipulations to owe, in effect, 30 and 40 times as much as they had. That's the big job for next year. There's another one, that is, with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac having been really hurt badly by the subprime crisis, and that's what happened. They were hit with the subprime crisis just like everyone else. They weren't particularly vulnerable. In fact, they were less vulnerable than some others, but a lot of institutions dealt with housing, that deal with housing, went under. We're going to rewrite housing finance in America, and we're going to rewrite it, I hope, in a way that has an important role for the private sector, but puts a regularized public sector piece in there so that we can also get housing built that's affordable for people who are making $40,000 and $50,000 and less.
How's this country going to be different after it deals with this crisis and sets up a new economic model or a new structure to move into the future?
Well, we're going to go back to the future in one way. That is, we didn't have these go-go investment dipsy doodles even into the 80s. And we're going to go back to that. We will be prosperous. Here's the deal, Charlie. I think this is going to be the third period in American history when we've had to do this. The private sector innovates, and the innovations produce a lot of value, but by definition, because they're innovations, there's no regulation to contain them. And then it's the job of the public sector to produce some regulations that allow you to get the benefit of the innovation, but reduce the abuses. The first one of these was in the late 19th century when the big enterprises came up, the trusts. And trusts weren't originally bad words. Steel and oil and coal, we hadn't done those, we could not have industrialized. But because they were new and had no regulation, Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson had to pass antitrust laws, pro-competitive laws, Federal Trade Commission. that's what happens. Then the stock market takes over because you've got big economic enterprises. You need to have that shared, widely dispersed ownership. And Franklin Roosevelt has to step in and say, wait a minute, I'm going to save the stock market from itself. I'm going to continue its value as a way to get money together to put into productive enterprises, but I'm going to stop the abuses. Securitization, the business by which I lend you money and then sell the right to be repaid to a bunch of other people and package all those loans and destroy the lender-borrower discipline. That's the new thing that we've got.
The two men who will be facing you tomorrow are Bernanke and Paulson. So far, understanding what they've had to deal with, do you give them good marks?
I do. They are both men of integrity. I was upset today in the Democratic caucus when one of my colleagues, I thought, unfairly impugned Secretary Paulson. I think they are honest, men of integrity, and they're trying hardest. But the system is inadequate. They reached a point where they were being forced to intervene on an ad hoc and individual basis. And with Ben Bernanke, whom I respect, nobody in a democratic society should have had the burden that he had of being given $800 billion and the ability to go and lend it whenever he thought right. It is much more important for us to systematize it. So I admire Paulson and Bernanke. I think, frankly, by the way, the two of them have done a very good job of breaking through the right-wing wall around the president, whether it was with the stimulus or here. President Bush's administration has suffered until recently, I think, from a very rigid ideological viewpoint. That's where you got this, oh, don't regulate, let the market do what it wants. Paulson and Bernanke are both conservative, but they understand that ideology can't trump reality. And for over a year now, they have worked together as a team to, I think, frankly, rescue the president from the right-wing ideology in which he was entrapped. I mean, I still obviously disagree with much of what they do, but there's been an element of pragmatism that's been very important.
When they brought this to you, to the Congress, and said, this is what we want to do, and announced that this is what we want to do, there was almost a chorus of people saying, well, I don't know if everything's perfect about this, but we've got to get it done. Each individual congressman and congresswoman were saying that. Do you see any reason to believe that this won't make its way through Congress with reasonable haste? I mean, with reasonable progress.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. There is. It's called democracy. You know, the average citizen says, wait, give me that again, $700 billion? No, it's not going to cost $700 billion.
And we need to decide right now, by noon tomorrow.
I was just with one of my colleagues who, I guess he'd been traveling, and he just happened to have Zimbabwean money. I said, I need this. I was going to a meeting of the Democratic caucus, and he gave me $700 billion in Zimbabwean money.
Which is?
Here it is. Here's $700 billion in Zimbabwean money. Unfortunately, I got to use dollars in this one. People need to be reassured. First of all, the question is, are you just rewarding the people who made the mistake? The answer is, well, unfortunately, to some extent. But if we don't do this, it's not, people said, well, these people on Wall Street, let them suffer. Frankly, the people who made these mistakes aren't going to suffer. They have millions of dollars. So maybe they'll have a couple million less. But they're not going to be going hungry. Their kids aren't going to drop out of school. They won't have to worry about where they get health care. The victims of this will be the average citizen, people making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $40,000 a year, who won't be able to get a car bought, and they won't be able to work in the auto sales place. I mean, any part of the economy that deals with credit, retail stores, places that sell furniture, computer stores, they are all at risk. So I understand people saying, why do I have to help these people out? The answer is, it's kind of, I suppose, like this. You get injured, and you go into the doctor, and the doctor is drunk a little too much. And you really are angry at the doctor, but you're hurting. It's in your interest to kind of help the doctor sober up because you need him in the short term. Now, you also want to put rules in that say maybe get a different doctor, but don't allow that to happen again. Yeah. We will do that.
Or maybe the doctor should stop drinking. Yes.
Well, I don't know if you can give a doctor advice, John.
Barney Frank, thank you very much. As always, I hope to come back and see you very soon. We'll be right back.